Good evening. Where are we? Lost you. Oh, good evening. And we're going to go back to the Ten Commandments, Aseret HaDibrot, part number 2. And raise the following question. Are these 10 commandments of ours, are they ours or are they more of a universal nature? So there was a controversy, and this goes back, I forget the date, but maybe a decade ago. This is wrong. There we go. Okay. There was a controversy going back maybe 10 years ago about the display of the Ten Commandments, the tablets in courthouses, and in particular, just outside the Dixie County courthouse in Florida. There was this display, which seems so appropriate. And the question was, well, but can you put religious symbols on state property? Why this case became big is because this, there were lots of cases about the courthouses being asked to remove their Aseret HaDibrot. But this one went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, the court ruled that if it was on government property, then it would have to be, it couldn't be, but if it was on private property, privately owned property, it wouldn't be. And of course, that caused, protests from the religious community, not the Jewish community. So it seems that we don't hold a monopoly on the Aseret HaDibrot. Why do I continue with this theme from last week? Because the tablets feature in this week's parasha again when it says that God said, to me, here are the tablets which Hashem gave to me, says Moshe. So he repeats the whole story. And on those tablets are the words that he spoke to you there at the Great Assembly. This is, of course, continuing from last week's parasha when he spoke about the actual covenant. Here it speaks more about the actual luchot, which after 40 days and 40 nights, Hashem gave me the 2 tablets of stone, tablets of the covenant. Of course, there was a bit of a setback because in the verses that I'm going to skip, Hashem says to Moshe, come down the mountain and see what your people have done. Moshe smashes the tablets, goes back up the mountain, and finally ends up getting, after 40 days of prayer and pleading, Hashem's agreement to give a new set of tablets, which is also in this week's parasha, where Hashem says to him eventually, after the 40 days, go up there, you carve the tablets of stone, like the first, but you're going to carve them, and then I will write on the tablets the commandments that were on the first tablets that you smashed, and you will then deposit them in the ark. So, let's go back to this discussion. Are the Aseret HaDibrot ours or the universal? Well, there is this famous medrash that says that Hashem appeared to all of the nations of the world. And that's why there's a verse, Hashem misinai ba, the Lord came from Sinai. This means that the revelation was to everybody, to all the nations. And the Medrash gives a lot of interpretations to that the same verse, the Lord came from Sinai. And the Medrash says the following, in one of the interpretations, famous story, that he went to the children of Esav. He offered it to all the nations of the world, and he said, we accept the Torah. And they asked, well, what's written in it? And the answer is, do not kill. And they said, well, the entire essence of our father is murder, as in the famous verse, Hayadayim Yedei Esav. And not only that, but our father said to us, by your sword shall you live. So this kind of, these are certainly not compatible with us. And furthermore, it goes to Ammon and Moab and said, you want to know what's in the Torah? Don't commit adultery. And they said, look, this is our entire essence. If you remember, the father of Ammon and Moab is, of course, Lot, and the birth of these two nations happened in a very, in incestuous and immoral way. This is not going to work for us. This prohibition is against immorality. Likewise, he goes to Ishmael, and he said, the Torah says, do not steal. And they said, no, that's not possible, and quoting again from the Torah, Ishmael be a wild man, his hands against all. So clearly, Torah is somehow connected with all of the world. And in a certain sense, Hashem offered to Gentile nations, and not just kind of to be able to say, well, I did offer it to you, you didn't want it. There seems to have been some level of connection between the Ten Commandments, universally given to the entire world out there, and then a level of deeper connection that comes with us. Of course, the set that they brought to the foundation of morality for the entire world, and Gentiles recognize this. Hence, the pictures I was showing you earlier of controversies about whether the Ten Commandments belong in courthouses or not. That's the basis of law. It's the basis of morality. It's the basis of of how we relate to God and how we relate to people around us. So, can we really claim that it is ours? And why I came back to this is because you'll recall that last week we spent, I was going to say around this table, but around the screen, a lot of time discussing the differences between the first and second tablets. I gave you 4 or 5 different explanations, interpretations as to why the text would differ from the first to the second. But I didn't find really one kind of thread that would explain it all. That just wasn't there. And it came, to me when I was listening to another shiur, and I heard a beautiful insight by the Klei Yakar. And the way the Klei Yakar puts it, all of the differences, at least the substantial ones, not the little grammatical or minor differences, or as I showed you, the differences between the spacing paragraphs, whether they're big ones or small ones, but all the substantial differences are actually, according to the Klei Yakar, all go down to this. That's the question which I was raising earlier. Universal or for the Jewish people? The Klei Yakar says to us, the first version of the Aseret HaDibrot is the universal version. That is for everybody. The second repeat in the book of Dvarim that we have in last week's parasha, that one is specifically to the Jewish people. And with this, we can now explain all of the differences and we can explain all the differences and all is going to make sense. So I'm going to go back to the slides that we spent quite a bit of time looking at last week. And let's look at this. First set of tablets, humanity. Second set, well, not set, but first version of the text, humanity. Second version, Jewish people. So let's see if I can just locate these Aseret HaDibrot. Here they are. Okay, and here we have, okay, if you'll remember, it was commandment number 3 that number 4, Shabbat, which had some very, very significant differences that we were concerned about, particularly as it would seem that Moshe, if he made those changes, well, this is very significant because, we're going from Zachor, which is about the obligations you have on Shabbat, making Kiddush, making Havdalah, eating a nice meal, to something much more comprehensive, which is the set of prohibitions that involve the concept of melacha on Shabbat. So how can there be such a serious deviation? The answer is simple. This is the universal version. This is the Jewish version. In the universal version, about remembering a Sabbath day, keeping it holy, I think that's a concept that is universally accepted that we have this, one day a week, which is the Lord's Day, which is the Sabbath, and whether you're Jewish or Christian, the Muslims also have their holy day. There is a Sabbath, so we celebrate it on Shabbos, and lahavdil, there are other religions that celebrate it on the Sunday. But it's the same. We acknowledge that there's a God in the world, and He told us to have one day. But in a sense, this is Shabbat light. This is Shabbat heavy. This is Shabbat plus on steroids. Okay, this is suddenly giving you, tomes, volumes and volumes of writing on the halachot of Shabbat. Forget the number now, but there are entire simanim, which is chapters in the Shulchan Aruch that deal with that aspect. This doesn't take up as much space. This is very big. It would seem that of humanity, God expects this kind of Shabbat, but the full Shabbat, that's our gift. Because we read about in our Shabbat prayers, Lo natato lageratzot. You didn't give it to the nations of the world, but then again you did. So here we go. There's the lighter form of Shabbat, which is given to the Jewish people. To the humanity, and there's the more involved, intense form of Shabbat that is given to the Jewish people specifically, which would explain the following. No significant differences on here, so I don't know why I kept the slide, but it's part of the text. But here, sorry, I missed that. Yeah. What do we have here on? Besides the Zachor and Shamor, we also have the words, Kasher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha. The way God commanded you. God has commanded you. It's a commandment which is specifically to us, and that's why Moshe feels the need to add these words to stress that. And also, he's trying to say that this adds to that. It's not instead of. It's not, well, there's the one form of Shabbat and the other, and this supplants the first version, but this actually is over and above. You need to do the Shamor, and also everything that God commanded you earlier. So this is not a new version of Shabbos which supplants the traditional Shabbos that they've been told about before. This is a Shabbos which actually is over and above that Shabbos. Now going back to this slide here, this also explains the rationale, the reason given for Shabbat. Remember, we looked at that last week also. For those of you who are here, this is the first version. In the first version, it's the reason we have to observe Shabbat is because, and that's traditional reason always given, 6 days Hashem created heaven and earth, and then rested on the seventh day, and therefore God blessed the Sabbath day, hallowed it, and so we will also observe it. So this is the rationale. That is a universal interpretation and rationale for Shabbat, which applies to all of humanity. But if you look at the bottom of the screen, we're talking about version 2, that is Shabbat plus. That one, another reason, additional reason is given, but you couldn't include it there because there we're talking about the universal aspect of Shabbat. That's not for everybody. This one here is specifically to us. Because we were slaves in Egypt, that's our nation. And Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, outstretched hand, strong hand, Zra Netuyah. That's why Hashem commanded us to do the Shabbos. That's why He commanded us Tzivcha. That's why God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day, you, the Jewish people. There's another reason why the rest of the world has to observe Shabbos, but their obligations are of a much lesser level. Hence, that's the full Shabbos as we do here. Incidentally, before I move on to the next commandment, which also has let's say some significant differences. Zra Netuyah, which is the outstretched hand, was actually the name of the operation when Israel somehow reached very far in Iran and did what it did over there. That was apparently the code name of the operation. I think Israel hasn't really claimed responsibility, but anyway, that's what we have. Let's go on to the next commandment. So Shabbos definitely has the most significant variations of all. But the other one that had some significant differences was honor your parents. What do we have here? In version number 1, we have honor your father and mother, so that you'll endure on the land that God gave you. But here, it is a new dimension here. Kasher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha, as God has commanded you. And you'll remember that I quoted the Rashi to you a week ago, and Rashi says, where did God command it? In Marah. That is, before even the Jews got to Mount Sinai, they made some stops, and there in Marah, they were already given the mitzvah of honoring parents and other precepts as well. Is honoring parents a Jewish precept or a universal precept? Well, let's look at the difference. There's a famous classical story about Dama ben Netina, and Dama is, the Gemara says, he is not a Jew. He's not a Jew. It stresses it. He's a non-Jew in Ashkelon. And what happened was that one of the stones of the Kohen Gadol's breastplate, Choshen Mishpat, was dislodged. To buy that new jewel was a lot of money. Dama was a dealer in stones. He had the correct jewel, but it was locked in a chest under the head of his father, who was fast asleep. And Dama wouldn't disturb his sleeping father, so he lost the sale. And the Gemara always uses this as the model for ultimate respect for father. Who would lose 600,000 gold coins because dad's asleep, I don't know, on the key that gives access to the chest? And most people would say, I think my father would definitely want me to do this and would wake their parent up. So the Gemara always gives this as the model, the paradigm of Kibbud Av V'Em, but he's not Jewish. Just for sake of completeness, this is the end of the story, is that he was rewarded with a para aduma, and he was offered a huge amount for his para aduma, and he's asking just for the money that he lost in the jewelry deal, because he wants to be compensated for that in that manner. So why are we being told that the model is this Dama's man, Dama, who's not of our faith? Clearly, it is telling us that the mitzvah is universal. But now, there is a difference between universal honor for parents, what we call Kibbud Av V'Em light, and a more substantial form that is required of us. At the first level, honoring parents is simply a form of gratitude. It's a moral, correct thing to do. Your parents have done so much for you, and in return, you want to do for them. So it's gratitude, and that's a very important, substantial Jewish value that you have to have hakarat haTov, and you have to recognize when people have done something good for you. You've got to pay them back. There are times when that doesn't apply. Question that often comes up is, my father gave me up for adoption, my parents gave me up for adoption, I've just, found my birth parents. Do I have the mitzvah of kibbud av va'em for them? And the answer is yes. Why is that? Well, it's not because of gratitude. It's not because of what they did for you, because they weren't able, they weren't in the position. We're not going to judge why they gave you up for adoption, but the point is they didn't do it. So is there the obligation of honoring parents? If it's only gratitude, then the mitzvah doesn't apply. But there's a deeper level of honoring parents, which is because it's God's commandment. It's God's commandment because the parents gave you the gift of life. And in doing that, they instilled in you soul which Hashem gave, and with that they became partners with Hashem in the creation of the world. The Talmud famously says that there are three partners in the birth of every child. So it's the father, mother, and Hashem. And together we have birth. God expresses His infinite essence by growth, by procreation, that we become partners in Hashem. In a sense, our power to procreate is the divine in us, because it's not something which is finite and human, like most of our activities. This is something which really reaches, taps deep into the infinite potential of Hashem. That level of kibbud av va'em makes us respect parents, even when and if there is no obligation of gratitude. That's kibbud av va'em on steroids. That's a far deeper level. And as I showed you earlier, Moshe adds the words kasher tzivcha, as God commanded you, but also Rashi says to us, this happened at Marah. What was going on at Marah? Just to refresh your memories. At Marah, the Jews arrived and there was no drinkable water, and they were quite scared and quite agitated, and they came to Moshe and said, we're going to die of thirst, and us and all our livestock. And it says Hashem showed Moshe a stick, and he threw that into the water became potable, drinkable, and there, Sham Sam Lo Chok Mishpat, there God established laws and just judgments. So there, some mitzvot were given. That was the stage in Jewish life when our needs were provided for from above. The clouds of glory had been with them for some time. Since they left Egypt for a few weeks, they arrived there at Marah, and they were given water, and that would be a more permanent solution that came afterwards when the well of Miriam was discovered, and that was able to give them water for the entire 40 years in the desert. Around the same time, they moved to a place called Alush. If I'm not mistaken, there in Alush, they were given a manna from heaven. And there again, the laws of Shabbos were reiterated with the mitzvah, the prohibition of going out into the fields to look for manna on Shabbos, and the double portion, and so forth. Now, did children need to show gratitude to parents at that stage in their history? No. Parents didn't have to schlep them out to the mall to buy them clothes, because the clouds of glory provided them clothes. They didn't have to at least protect the clothes they were wearing, so there was no need for them to get other clothes. So except for the teenagers who probably wanted changes of clothing, everybody else was quite happy. There was no need to thank parents, to be grateful to them for providing us with sustenance and food and drink and so forth. So in Marah, the model of kibbud av va'em was not the traditional model of gratitude, but something far deeper, which is connected with the fact that parents are partners with Hashem. So here we have, honor your parents as God commanded you. And where was this? This was in Marah, and of course there's also the fact that there's also a greater reward, and that is the man yitavlach, that God will actually give you good. I think we elaborated on that last week. And then finally, there's one more commandment. I'm going to end with that, but that one also has a significant difference. I think that things will just fall into place for you very easily. It's the 10th commandment. Now, where was a significant difference between the first version and the second version? It's in this word here, lo tachmod, which we say do not covet, and lo titaveh, which means you shall not crave, or none of you shall crave. What is the difference between coveting and craving? It was at the tail end of last week's shiur. Coveting means to actively scheme and do things to obtain your neighbor or your fellow's possessions. Tit aveh is far deeper than that. Tit aveh is don't even long for it, don't even crave it. It's about suppressing anything in your heart that would want you to have that which belongs to your neighbor. That's far more difficult, far more complicated. How do you even reach a level where you can control your innermost feelings, particularly when you come to cravings, which are kind of so natural? Yeah. So I don't ever dream of taking a flight in the Air Force One. Why? Because I'm not the president of the United States. That's not my plane. And it just kind of, so those are not the things we dream about. We dream about the things that we think we rightfully should have, and we're jealous of them. But if we have a level of faith that what my neighbor has, his Lamborghini in the driveway, it's just not meant to be mine. It's just not mine. Then can you still see me? Just give me a thumbs up, because my picture has disappeared somehow. Are you there? Yes. Can you hear me, see me? Let's carry on. Where can I find this? Anyway, I'm sorry, but we're going to wind up. There is do not covet, and then there is do not belong. As I said, we have the basic 10 commandments, the light portion, then we have the full enhanced version of the children of Israel. Hashem required something far deeper, far more powerful. Above the blue line, that's universal mitzvah, do not covet. But of us, Hashem has a deeper and stronger expectation, and that is the mitzvah of do not even crave. So here we have it, two versions, one universal and one for our people. And it's beautiful. The Kli Yakar kind of explains all the differences right through the Aseret HaDibrot with this difference. Please God, next week we're going to deal with some new topic. Can't stretch that for 3 weeks, but I actually heard this interpretation early in the week, actually this morning, early in the day. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I gave up all other thoughts for a shiur and said I want to share this with you.